Hi folks, Bernie with Telecompetitor and Pivot, and I'm here today talking with Dean Mischke of Finley Engineering about the implications of the supply chain slowdown on the broadband industry. So Dean, let's dig a little deeper on those implications. What are those implications for the broadband industry? What are some of the disruptive factors that you see?
We suffer the same aspects of everyone else. Our industry relies on labor and materials. The labor is obviously from within the country, but if we take a look at that wage gap expansion, it's becoming extremely difficult for companies to find good labor. When you have an industry that requires a significant amount of training to be effective, that just simply slows down the whole process of getting qualified staff, unless you go ahead and find somebody that's already qualified. But now you're paying a much higher premium for that person than you would have, months ago or a year ago. The final part of it is there's no certainty. A lot of these projects that we're looking at, all of the funding coming out, some of them have time constraints as to how long you can own a piece of material before you can apply it to a job, because they don't want you to use up all your junk and get paid for it. Along with that is, how do you staff quickly enough to get ready for what's coming out? And so there are a lot of things that we need to start looking at as this whole funding operation looks to ramp up production. I think the industry does about $65 to $85 billion worth of broadband deployments a month, or a year, I should say. This whole BEAD project is going to add another 5%. And in an area where materials are already tight, it's just going to make things worse.
If we were to dig a little deeper and talk about the carriers themselves, what are some implications for carriers and their partners as we try to manage this supply chain challenge?
When this whole thing started in terms of broadband deployment and the grant funding and everything else like that, it really started that we were going to have auctions and various funding sources to build projects that weren't feasible. Well, in the real world, if a project isn't feasible, you don't do all the work to get a project ready for building. It's not feasible. Why invest money after bad money? And so many companies didn't do that, and understandably so. It's not feasible. Why do it? Well, now what they're saying is if it were feasible with grant funding, how would you do it? And what we have come to find is that historically, we had to do a design, and that was a lot of labor, and then we'd go look at cost analysis and financial analysis, and then finally we would get to the point of applying for a grant and getting the money. And everything started stretching out so far that by the time you got the money and then ordered materials, the supply chain issues are now making it such that a lot of people are getting grants but don't have the materials to go build the product and may not for another year or two. And if the grant window is short enough, they may not finish in time. And so now they're looking at extensions. And so companies are going to have to change their mindset of how they plan for future developments. And I think that's going to be a struggle in several aspects, both in terms of labor and in terms of material. One of the things that I've kind of struggled with a little bit is if we take a look at who's going to get the money. If the large operating companies are going to get the money, they can generate enough sheer volume that the suppliers and the manufacturers are going to pay attention. But if it's the tier threes trying to pick up what's left over, or even if they get a larger chunk of it, will they be able to generate enough interest from the suppliers and manufacturers to make sure that they can get their project started and built on time? So that's the concern that I look at is in the next round of BEAD, the majority of that's going to the states. And so now bidders of looking to derive funding are going to have to look at 50 different models as to what it's going to take to solve the problem, as compared to, say, looking at just NTIA, where it's the same structure across the entire United States. Each local area is going to have to solve their own puzzle, so to speak, and find a way to be successful. One of the things that I think that has changed a little bit from, say, even 4 years ago to now is that with the advent of GIS and large data manipulation, we're finding that the time from design to the time to the cost model has dropped dramatically, both in terms of cost and length of time to accomplish. They're still pretty high level, and you still need to go through and clean it up, but you don't have to do that step until you're awarded. But it's at least giving companies a chance to find a rough level of materials that they're going to need and start getting those prepared.